The shrill voice carried across the beach like a foghorn, slicing through the peaceful rhythm of the waves. "Excuse me. Excuse me. What do you think you're doing on my property?" Michael Reeves lowered his coffee mug slowly, the peaceful morning he'd been enjoying on his deck instantly shattered. He turned to find a woman in her 50s, sporting an immaculate blonde bob and oversized designer sunglasses, standing at the edge of his property line with her hands planted firmly on her hips. Behind her, a man who appeared to be her husband lingered awkwardly, his gaze fixed on the sand. "I'm sorry," Michael called back, setting his mug on the railing. "You heard me," the woman snapped, marching toward him with surprising speed for someone wearing white linen pants on a beach. "This entire stretch is private property, my private property." Michael had purchased the modest beach house 3 months ago after years of saving and planning. At 42, it represented everything he'd worked for. A place of his own where he could escape the chaos of the city and the stress of his job as a software engineer. The cottage wasn't fancy, but its weathered blue siding and wraparound deck perched on the dunes had felt like home from the moment he first seen it. "Ma'am, there must be some misunderstanding. I purchased this property in April." He gestured to the house behind him. "I have all the documentation." The woman's face contorted into an expression of theatrical disbelief. "That's impossible. My family has owned this entire beachfront for generations. You're trespassing, and I want you off my land immediately." "Karen, maybe we should," her husband began, but she silenced him with a sharp look. "Don't carry me, Doug. I know what I'm talking about." She turned back to Michael, her voice rising. "My grandfather built the first house on this beach in 1952. Everything from the pier to the point belongs to the Henderson family." Michael took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. He dealt with difficult people throughout his career, but this was different. This was his sanctuary being challenged. "My name is Michael Reeves, and I'm the legal owner of this property. I'd be happy to clear up any confusion, but I assure you the sale was completely legitimate." "Well, Michael," she said, spitting out his name like it tasted bad, "I don't know who scammed you, but they had no right to sell you anything. This has been Henderson property for 70 years. The confrontation was beginning to draw attention. An elderly couple walking their dog had stopped to watch, and a family setting up beach chairs nearby was casting curious glances in their direction. "Perhaps we could discuss this civilly," Michael suggested. "Would you like to come up and have some coffee while we sort this out?" Karen's eyes narrowed suspiciously behind her sunglasses. "I'm not stepping foot in a house built illegally on my land. Either you pack up and leave, or I'm calling the authorities." Michael felt a knot forming in his stomach. He reviewed every document with his lawyer before signing. There couldn't possibly be any question about the legitimacy of his purchase, yet the absolute conviction in this woman's voice was making him uneasy. "I understand you're upset, but threatening me isn't going to resolve anything," he said firmly. "I have all the legal documentation inside. Perhaps if you gave me your contact information, our lawyers called." Karen cut him off with a dismissive wave. "I don't need lawyers to tell me what I already know." She pulled out her phone. "You have 5 minutes to get off my property before I call 911. Michael stared at her in disbelief. 5 minutes to vacate the home he'd spent his life savings on? This had to be some kind of bizarre mistake or a scam. Either way, he wasn't going anywhere. "Mrs. Henderson, I think you should reconsider making that call," he warned. "Filing a false report is a serious offense." Karen's finger hovered over her phone screen, her expression a mixture of indignation and triumph. "We'll see who's filing a false report," she replied coldly and began to dial. Michael watched in stunned disbelief as Karen actually went through with her threat, her manicured finger jabbing at her phone screen with theatrical urgency. Behind her, Doug's discomfort was palpable as he shifted his weight from one foot to another, casting apologetic glances toward Michael. "Yes, hello." "I need to report a trespasser," Karen spoke into the phone, her voice suddenly syrupy with affected distress. "A man has constructed an illegal dwelling on my family's beachfront property. Yes, I've asked him to leave, but he's refusing. I feel threatened." Michael's jaw clenched. The audacity of this woman was astounding. He'd never been in trouble with the law in his life, and now he was about to have police officers dispatched to his legally purchased home because of some stranger's delusions or calculated scheme. "Ma'am, I'm going inside to get my property documents," Michael announced firmly. "Feel free to wait for the police, but I suggest you prepare to be embarrassed." As he turned to enter his house, he heard Karen's voice rise an octave. "He's going inside. He might be getting a weapon. Please hurry." Michael stopped in his tracks, turning slowly to face her. "Are you serious right now? I just told you I'm getting my property paperwork." Karen covered the phone's microphone. "I know exactly what you're doing. You're panicking because you know I've caught you. Well, it won't work. The Henderson family has connections in this town." "Dub," Michael addressed her husband directly, hoping to find an ally in reason. "Does this happen often? Your wife falsely claiming ownership of other people's property? Doug opened his mouth to respond, but Karen cut him off. Don't you dare speak to my husband. This will all be sorted out when the authorities arrive. 20 tense minutes later, two police cruisers pulled into Michael's driveway, their tires crunching on the shell-paved surface. Karen immediately rushed toward the officers as they exited their vehicles, launching into a frenzied explanation before they could even introduce themselves. Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man has constructed an illegal dwelling on Henderson family land without permission. My grandfather, Theodore Henderson, purchased this entire stretch in 1952, and we have the original deed at home. Officer Ramirez, a stocky man with a salt and pepper crew cut, managed to get a word in. Ma'am, please slow down. Let's start from the beginning. His partner, Officer Chen, approached Michael. Sir, can I get your name and some ID, please? Michael Reeves, he replied, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. And I can assure you I legally purchased this property 3 months ago. I have all the documentation inside. Karen scoffed loudly. That's impossible. He's lying to you, officers. Officer Chen raised a calming hand. Ma'am, we need to hear from both parties. Please give us a moment. Michael invited the officers inside his home, much to Karen's vocal protestations. His hands trembled slightly as he retrieved the folder containing his closing documents from his home office. He'd never imagined having to defend his rightful ownership like this. Here's everything, he said, spreading the papers on his kitchen table. Purchase agreement, title search results, deed transfer, property survey, all properly filed with the county. I worked with Coastal Realty and Abrams Law Office for the transaction. The officers studied the documents carefully. Officer Ramirez nodded slowly. These appear to be in order, Mr. Reeves. The property lines are clearly defined here. When they stepped back outside, Karen was pacing the deck, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, they're looking at his fraudulent paperwork right now, and she was saying, I've already called our attorney. Mrs. Henderson. Officer Chen began, we reviewed Mr. Reeves' documentation, and everything appears to be legally in order. His deed shows clear ownership of this parcel. Karen's face flushed crimson. That's preposterous. He's obviously forged those documents. My family has the original deed from 1952. Do you have that deed with you now, ma'am? Officer Ramirez asked. Of course not. It's in our safe at home in Charleston. We're just here for our annual beach vacation, she snapped, gesturing toward a large white house visible about half a mile down the beach. But I know what my family owns. Doug finally stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. Karen, honey, maybe we should double-check our records before we... I don't need to check anything. Karen shrugged his hand away. Officers, I demand you remove this man from my property immediately. Officer Chen exchanged a glance with her partner before addressing Karen again. Ma'am, based on the legal documentation we've seen, Mr. Reeves is the rightful owner of this property. Without contrary documentation, we have no grounds to remove him. Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. Karen's expression transformed from indignation to calculation in an instant. Fine, she said, her voice suddenly cool and controlled. If you won't do your jobs, I'll handle this myself. This isn't over, Mr. Reeves. She turned to Doug. Come on, we're calling Franklin. As the Hendersons retreated down the beach, Officer Ramirez turned to Michael. Sir, do you want to file a report about this incident? Michael considered for a moment, watching Karen's rigid posture as she marched away. Not at this time. I'm hoping she'll check her records and realize her mistake. Officer Chen didn't look convinced. Well, we'll document this call anyway. And Mr. Reeves, you might want to keep those property documents handy. Something tells me this isn't the last you'll hear from Mrs. Henderson. Looking at Karen's retreating figure and remembering the determination in her eyes, Michael had this sinking feeling that Officer Chen was absolutely right. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful with gentle waves lapping at the shore. Michael tried to recapture the peace he felt before Karen Henderson disrupted his life, but his morning coffee on the deck was tainted by watchfulness, his eyes repeatedly drifting toward the Henderson vacation home in the distance. He'd spent half the night researching property records online, double and triple checking the history of his land. Everything confirmed what he already knew. The property was legitimately his. But Karen's absolute certainty had planted a seed of unease that refused to be dislodged. Around 10 o'clock, Michael spotted a sleek black SUV pulling into the shelled driveway of the Henderson vacation home. 3 people emerged, Karen, Doug, and a tall, gray-haired man in an expensive-looking suit carrying a leather briefcase. Even from a distance, Michael could see Karen animatedly pointing in his direction. So that must be Franklin, Michael muttered to himself, retreating inside to call his real estate attorney, Lisa Abrams. They have absolutely no case, Michael, Lisa assured him after he explained the situation. Your title search was comprehensive. If there had been any Henderson claim on that property, it would have appeared in the records. So why is she so convinced? Michael asked. Could be anything. Mistaken property lines, family mythology that's grown over the years, or maybe they once owned it decades ago and sold it, but family stories glossed over that part. It happens more often than you'd think with vacation properties passed through generations. Michael was only half listening, his attention caught by movement outside his front window. The black SUV was now parked at the end of his driveway, and the trio was walking toward his house. Lisa, they're here now. With someone who looks like a lawyer, what should I do? Be polite but firm. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything. If they want to discuss property lines, suggest a formal survey with both parties present, and call me back immediately if things escalate. Moments after hanging up, Michael's doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find Karen, Doug, and the unknown man standing on his porch. "Good morning," Michael said evenly. Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. "This is Franklin Whitmore, our family attorney. He's here to straighten out this property dispute once and for all." Franklin Whitmore extended his hand with practiced smoothness. "Mr. Reeves, I understand there's been some confusion about property boundaries. I was hoping we might have a conversation to clear things up." Michael shook the man's hand but remained in his doorway. "I'm happy to discuss this, but I should let you know I've already contacted my attorney. She's very familiar with the property and assisted with my purchase." Something flickered briefly in Franklin's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or disappointment that Michael wasn't unprepared. "Excellent," Franklin replied. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting with both attorneys present. In the meantime, Mrs. Henderson has some historical documents she'd like to share with you." Karen thrust forward a manila folder. "These prove what I've been saying. The Henderson claim to this land dates back 3 generations. Michael accepted the folder and opened it, finding several photocopied documents inside. The topmost was a deed from 1952, showing Theodore Henderson's purchase of beachfront property. The document included a hand-drawn map that did indeed seem to encompass a large stretch of beach, possibly including Michael's property. "I see," Michael said carefully, "but this doesn't account for any subsequent property divisions or sales over the last 70 years. Franklin cleared his throat. "If I may, Mr. Reeves, the Hendersons believe there may have been some irregularities in how their family property was divided and sold over time. Specifically, they question whether proper procedures were followed when this particular parcel was separated from the original Henderson estate." "So you're suggesting my property was illegally subdivided?" Michael asked, a knot forming in his stomach despite Lisa's reassurances. "We're exploring that possibility," Franklin said smoothly. "In the spirit of resolving this amicably, the Hendersons would be willing to offer you compensation for any improvements you've made to the property in exchange for you relinquishing your claim." Karen nodded vigorously. "We're being more than generous, considering you're essentially a squatter on Henderson land." Michael felt his temper rising but kept his voice steady. "I appreciate your offer, but I'm not a squatter. I'm the legal owner of this property, and I have no intention of relinquishing my claim to a home I purchased in good faith." Franklin's professional smile didn't waver. "I understand your position, Mr. Reeves. However, if our investigation confirms improprieties in how this land was separated from the Henderson estate, you could find yourself in a lengthy and expensive legal battle. Mrs. Henderson is offering you a chance to avoid that unpleasantness." The implication was clear. This was a shakedown. They were hoping he would be intimidated into selling his property at a discount rather than face a legal challenge, regardless of how flimsy their claim might be. "I think we're done here," Michael said firmly. "Any further communication should go through my attorney, Lisa Abrams of Abrams Law Office. I'll have her contact you, Mr. Whitmore." Karen stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "You're making a huge mistake. My family has connections throughout this county. We could make your life very difficult." "Karen," Dub murmured, placing a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "That's enough." Franklin handed Michael his business card. "Please have your attorney contact me at her earliest convenience. I hope we can resolve this without resorting to the courts, but the Hendersons are prepared to pursue all available legal avenues." As the trio walked back toward their vehicle, Michael noticed several neighbors watching the exchange from their porches or windows. Word had clearly spread about yesterday's police visit, and now his property dispute was becoming neighborhood entertainment. Back inside, Michael called Lisa immediately and described what had happened, including the document Karen had shown him. "Forward me a photo of that deed and map," Lisa instructed. "And don't worry about their threats. This sort of intimidation is exactly why we did such a thorough title search before your purchase. If there were any legitimate Henderson claim, it would have been flagged." "But what if there were irregularities like they suggested?" Michael asked. Lisa sighed. "Look, even if there were some technical issue with how the property was subdivided decades ago, which is extremely unlikely. You're a bona fide purchaser who bought the property in good faith. The law protects you. They're fishing for a settlement, hoping you'll pay them to go away." Michael glanced out his window and saw Karen still standing beside the SUV, staring at his house with undisguised hostility. "Something tells me it won't be going away easily," he said. "She seems obsessed with this property." "Then we'll deal with it properly," Lisa assured him. "In the meantime, document everything. And Michael, try not to let this ruin your beach house experience. That's exactly what they want." But as Michael hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen Henderson's crusade was just beginning and peaceful mornings on his deck might be a thing of the past. 3 days passed without incident. Michael began to hope that perhaps the Hendersons had realized the futility of their claim and decided to enjoy the remainder of their vacation instead of pursuing a baseless property dispute. Lisa had examined the documents Karen provided and confirmed what Michael already suspected. They showed nothing that would override his clear title to the property. "The map I showed you is hand-drawn and not to scale," Lisa explained during their follow-up call. "And more importantly, accounting records show the original Henderson property was legally subdivided in 1978, with your parcel sold to the Wilson family. It changed hands twice more before you purchased it. All completely legitimate transactions." The information should have put Michael's mind at ease, but something about Karen's certainty continued to nag at him. People didn't typically become that fixated on property without reason. During his morning walks on the beach, he found himself studying the large white Henderson vacation home in the distance, wondering what story they told themselves about his land. On the fourth morning, Michael was enjoying breakfast on his deck when he noticed a county vehicle pulling into his driveway. A man in a tan uniform climbed out, clipboard in hand, and approached the house. "Michael Reeves," the man called out. "That's me," Michael replied, setting down his coffee mug and walking down the steps to meet the visitor. "Pete Dawson, County Zoning Department," the man said, extending his hand. "We received a complaint about possible code violations on this property." Michael stared at him in disbelief. "Code violations? This house passed inspection just 3 months ago when I purchased it." Pete looked uncomfortable. "Yes, well, we're required to follow up on all complaints. The specific concerns relate to the deck extension allegedly being too close to the coastal setback line and a question about whether the septic system was properly permitted during the last renovation." Michael didn't need to ask who had filed the complaint. "Let me guess. The Hendersons?" Pete's grimace confirmed it. "Look, I know about the property dispute. Word gets around. But I still have to do my job and check these things out." For the next hour, Pete meticulously measured the distance from Michael's deck to the dune line, inspected the septic system, and reviewed all of Michael's permits and inspection documents. Throughout the process, Michael noticed Karen watching from down the beach, binoculars in hand. "Everything checks out," Pete finally announced. "Your deck is well within the setback requirements, and all your systems are properly permitted and up to code." "I appreciate your thoroughness," Michael said sincerely, "and I'm sorry you had to waste your time on a frivolous complaint." Pete shrugged. "Not the first time, won't be the last. Some people think they can use county departments to fight their personal battles." He glanced toward Karen's distant figure. "Word of advice? Get yourself a security camera system. People who start with bogus complaints sometimes escalate to other forms of harassment." Michael took the advice to heart, ordering a comprehensive security system that afternoon. It arrived 2 days later, and he spent the evening installing cameras covering his property from all angles, with footage backing up to both cloud storage and a local hard drive. The very next morning, the system proved its worth. Michael was on a work video call when his phone buzzed with a security alert. Glancing at the notification, he saw thumbnail images of Karen and Doug Henderson on his property, examining his deck with measuring tape while a third person, not Franklin Whitmore, but another official-looking stranger, took photographs. "I'm sorry, I need to step away for a moment," Michael told his colleagues, muting his call and rushing outside. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded as he burst through his front door. Karen jumped but quickly recovered her composure. "Oh, Michael, this is Harold Winters from Atlantic Coastal Commission. He's here to verify that your structure complies with coastal protection regulations." The man, who wore khakis and a polo shirt with an embroidered logo, nodded stiffly. "We received an anonymous tip about potential dune disturbance." "Anonymous?" Michael echoed incredulously. "They're standing right next to you. And you're all trespassing on private property." He turned to the Hendersons. "Did you even request an official inspection, or did you just convince your friend here to help you harass me?" Harold looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Henderson contacted our office with concerns. As a coastal protection advocate, she has raised valid issues in the past. So you thought you conduct an inspection without notifying the property owner?" Michael interrupted. "Is that standard procedure for the Atlantic Coastal Commission?" "Well, no, but you need to leave. All of you." Now, Michael pulled out his phone. "I have recorded evidence of you trespassing. I'm prepared to file a harassment complaint with the police." Karen's face contorted with fury. "We are performing a necessary environmental assessment." The dunes on this property have historical significance and may contain protected species habitat. Then you can follow proper procedures and notify me officially, Michael replied. Harold, is this an official inspection? Harold shifted his weight nervously. Not exactly. I was just doing preliminary. He doesn't need to explain himself to you. Karen interjected. This entire dune system should never have been built upon in the first place. A new theory began to form in Michael's mind. Perhaps this wasn't about property ownership at all, but about Karen's environmental activism gone to extremes. Karen, he said carefully, if you're concerned about coastal protection, I'm happy to discuss that. I care about preserving the beach ecosystem too, but inventing a false property claim and trespassing isn't the way to address environmental concerns. False claim? Karen sputtered. How dare you? My grandfather. Your grandfather sold this parcel in 1978, Michael stated flatly. It's all in the county records, so either you're deliberately lying or your family never told you about the sale. Doug suddenly looked intensely interested. 1978? Are you certain about that date? Absolutely, Michael confirmed. My attorney verified it. Something shifted in Doug's expression, a dawning realization. Karen, he said quietly, that's the year your parents divorced. Your mother took you to Connecticut that summer. Karen froze, her righteous indignation faltering momentarily. What are you implying? I'm saying maybe your grandfather sold this piece while you were away, Doug suggested gently. You always talk about spending childhood summers here. But after the divorce, you didn't come back until you were in college. That's ridiculous, Karen snapped, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. My grandfather would never have sold Henderson land without telling me. He promised this would all be mine someday. Michael felt a twinge of sympathy despite himself. Look, property records don't lie. If this is about cherished childhood memories, I understand that. But that doesn't justify what you've been doing. This isn't over, Karen declared, but the fire in her voice had dimmed. Come on, Doug. Harold. As they retreated down the beach, Michael heard Doug trying to reason with his wife. Karen, we need to check the family records before we take this any further. If your grandfather did sell that parcel during your parents' divorce, Michael watched them go, wondering if this might finally be the end of his property nightmare or just the calm before an even bigger storm. 2 weeks passed without any sign of Karen or Doug Henderson. Michael's security cameras captured nothing more threatening than curious seagulls and the occasional deer wandering up from the conservation area behind his property. Gradually, he began to relax, settling back into the peaceful routine he'd envisioned when purchasing his beach house. Lisa called with an update. Good news, she announced. Franklin Whitmore contacted me to formally withdraw any claims the Hendersons might have made regarding your property. Really? Michael felt a surge of relief. Did he say why? Not specifically, but he apologized for, quote, any inconvenience or distress caused by his clients. Between you and me, I think they discovered incontrovertible evidence that they have no claim whatsoever. Michael thought back to Doug's reaction when he mentioned the 1978 sale date. I think you're right. That evening, as Michael sat on his deck watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, he noticed two figures walking along the shoreline toward his house. Even at a distance, he recognized Karen and Doug Henderson. His muscles tensed, preparing for another confrontation. To his surprise, when they reached the edge of his property, they stopped and called up to him respectfully. Mr. Reeves, could we speak with you for a moment? Doug's voice carried clearly in the evening air. Michael hesitated and then nodded. Come on up. As they climbed the steps to his deck, Michael noticed the change in Karen immediately. Gone was the imperious entitlement that had characterized their previous encounters. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze uncertain. We owe you an apology, Doug began, his hand resting supportively on his wife's back. A significant one. Karen cleared her throat. I was wrong about the property, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. After our last encounter, Doug insisted we check the family records thoroughly. We found the deed of sale, Doug continued when Karen faltered. Karen's grandfather did indeed sell this parcel in 1978 during a financially difficult period for the family. It coincided with Karen's parents' divorce when she was taken to Connecticut by her mother. My grandfather never told me, Karen added softly. I spent every summer here until I was 10, and then didn't return until college. By then, the original property line had been forgotten or deliberately obscured. Michael studied her face, seeing not the entitled Karen of their previous encounters, but a woman confronting the collapse of a cherished family narrative. My grandfather always told me the entire stretch would be mine someday, she continued. Even after I returned as an adult, he maintained the fiction that nothing had changed. He'd point to this spot from our deck and say, all the way to the pier, that's Henderson land. I never thought to question it. We found letters, Dove explained. After Karen's grandmother died, her grandfather struggled financially. He sold this parcel but couldn't bring himself to tell Karen, knowing how much she loved playing here as a child. It was her special place, Doug said gently. The sale happened during a traumatic time in her life, parents divorcing, moving away from the beach she loved. Her grandfather couldn't bear to add to that pain. Michael felt his resentment softening. I can understand that, but it doesn't excuse the harassment. No, it doesn't, Karen agreed, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. My behavior was inexcusable. When I saw construction beginning on my special childhood spot 3 years ago, I was upset but didn't know who to contact. Then when you moved in, something just snapped. I convinced myself you were the trespasser. We've withdrawn all complaints filed with county offices, Doug assured him. And I've personally contacted everyone Karen involved in this dispute to clarify that you are the rightful owner. Karen reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This doesn't make up for the stress we caused, but I hope it helps. Michael opened the envelope to find a check for a substantial amount and a formal letter of apology. For your legal expenses, the security system, and, well, for the distress, Karen explained. I also wanted you to have this. She handed him a small, weathered toy shovel. I used to build sandcastles right where your deck stands now. It seems fitting that it returns to this place. Michael accepted the unexpected peace offerings, touched by the gesture despite everything that had transpired. Thank you. That can't have been easy. Harder than you know, Karen admitted with a wan smile. I'm seeing a therapist now. Turns out I have some unresolved issues around my parents' divorce and my grandfather's death. Who knew? Her attempt at humor was fragile but genuine. We're selling our vacation house, Doug added. Too many complicated memories here. We found a place in North Carolina where we can start fresh. As they prepared to leave, Karen paused at the top of the deck steps, gazing out at the ocean. It really is beautiful here. I hope you'll be happy. I think I will be, Michael replied honestly. After they departed, Michael sat watching the waves in the gathering dusk, turning the small toy shovel over in his hands. The land beneath his house had been Karen's childhood sanctuary, a place of innocence before family fractures changed everything. No wonder she fought so fiercely. She wasn't just claiming property, but trying to reclaim a lost piece of her past. The next morning, Michael woke early and walked down to the beach with his coffee. For the first time since moving in, he felt fully at peace. The weight of the dispute finally lifted. As he strolled along the shoreline, he noticed something near the water's edge. A small, intricately built sandcastle with a tiny Henderson family flag planted at its peak. Michael smiled, recognizing the peace offering for what it was. He carefully stepped around it, leaving it intact for the tide to reclaim its own time. Later that day, a local carpenter arrived to help Michael with a project, extending his deck to include a small platform at beach level, perfect for watching sunsets without disturbing the dunes. As they worked, Michael found himself sharing Karen's story with the carpenter. You know, the carpenter said thoughtfully, there's an old saying around here that the beach belongs to no one and everyone. Sounds like she learned that lesson the hard way. We all did, Michael replied, driving a nail into the new deck boards, but I think we're all better for it. 6 months later, Michael received a postcard from North Carolina. The message was simple. Found a new special place. Hope you're enjoying yours. K&D Henderson. Michael pinned it to his refrigerator alongside a photograph of his completed deck, where the small toy shovel now hung as a quirky decoration. Reminder that even the most entitled Karen might have a hidden story, and that some disputes end not with a winner and loser, but with understanding and, eventually, peace.